Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth, with hosts Doug King and Cody Deese.
Thank you. I am Doug.
I'm Cody.
Hey, man, we're glad to be back.
Oh, come on, Doug.
Feeling it.
Eschatology, Part 5.
Yeah. You know, I have been in this for all my life, and just a recommendation to folks, this is a great way to meet people at a party. Like if you don't know someone, to go up and just start talking, ask them, you know, what do you think about eschatology?
It's funny.
It's a great icebreaker.
My wife listened to one of the episodes the other day,
Yeah.
and she was like, you guys really love this word, eschatological.
Yeah. It's almost like it's eschatological. I want to turn your mind on. That's kind of like there's an Olivia Newton-John song that's something like that. But anyway, yeah, it's a great word.
I love it. Well, Doug, last episode we were talking about the temple and the fall of the temple. Before we jump back into all of that, let's bring us up to speed a little bit on, again, for our audience, we are dealing with three separate issues, which are also the same. One, the map and trajectory of the evolution of human consciousness, which is spiral dynamics.
Right.
Also, Ken Wilber, Theory of Everything, writes about the four quadrants. And so we're talking about both of those. We're also, in the show notes, the Venn diagram,
Right,
which you have form, which is spiral dynamics, which is first tier. Then you have transform, which is the evolutionary leap from first tier to second tier. And then you have formless. And we're in that in-between liminal space of transform.
Yep.
That also in the biblical narrative has to do with eschatology.
Yes.
And eschatology for us is beginning with the cross and ending with this temple.
Yes.
And so we're talking about that transformation. We're talking about that 40 years
Right.
from the cross to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, this is the study of end times.
Yes. And because it is a trajectory of form to formless, as you and I have talked about, and the reason we're doing this podcast, this is not just a sidebar conversation that is an interesting piece of what's in the narrative. All of this, as we'll see, and as time goes on with these podcasts, that this systemic look of one cosmology to another cosmology, from form to formlessness and all that goes with that, is going to integrate with my own personal transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in fact, what we're saying is that the reframing of the biblical narrative is going to be a reframing of the way I deal with this same movement in my life of transformation. And that what we will see when we investigate in conversations where we're going to have folks in here that are in the world of therapy, or we're going to talk about the Enneagram, which we haven't really gotten to a lot yet. Danae and I have said a little bit about it, and using it as a model of personal transformation, we're going to see that when we get into this idea of my own personal transformation, it's going to relate directly to an eschatological process, in that who I've been, who I used to be, who I was, is not who I am today and won't be who I am tomorrow.
Come on, Doug.
Now, the question is, will I be attached to form in the sense that I am in bondage to something? I'm in a loop that I can't seem to get out of, because when it comes to form, you cannot have bondage without boundary. So we're going to look at it on the high level, which the narrative presents, but we kind of call a timeout and remind everyone as we're going through this is not just a disconnected look at an interesting subject.
Yeah, I think that's really important. This isn't some abstract, floaty idea. But the reason we're even doing this series on eschatology is because, for starters, it not only is the central theme of the text, the biblical narrative. Eschatology for us is not something that's just held out in the future that we're all speculating about. It's the crux and the centerpiece from the cross to the temple.
Yes.
But beyond that, this has massive ramifications for our own personal lives.
Yes.
And this is why we're bringing in the spiral and the four quadrants, because this is what it means for consciousness to evolve. This is what it means for us to grow.
Yeah.
There is a dying, there is a rising. And that is at the heart of why we're even talking about eschatology.
Yeah. And so back to your point, bringing up the fact that we left off with temple, right now we're talking about the different forms that Jesus came to transform, which means to transcend form, and that formlessness is not the absence of form. We will say this over and over again. Rather, it is detachment from form. So the cross event is Jesus detaching from the form of his biology, which required a faith, and his faith was that he was formless. And so he was willing to die on that cross, which is to say, to detach from that form, because that was his faith. His faith was that the essence, you brought this up at Vinings Lake, you did a real good job when you were talking about the internal universe. Mm-hmm. It's this faith that, no, my true identity is formless, and so it doesn't have an end. Mm-hmm. And it's not governed by time, space, or biology. And again, now we're saying that what is happening within the narrative, it's telling the story of me. And it's telling a story about how I am not just me, but in relation to others. And that will be determined by how I see my relationship ultimately with God.
Yeah, I love that, because at the heart of all this is where we're headed, which is a universal God identity.
Yes.
And honestly, Doug, when the writers talk about the good news, like the gospel, like, good God, that is good news.
That's good news.
That at the heart of all nations, all people,
yes.
and I emphasize all, man, there is an essence.
Yes.
Some might call it a true self.
Yes.
But it's who we really are.
Yeah.
It's the awareness and the consciousness behind the flesh and blood form of our bodies.
Yes.
It is the essence behind the thought patterns. And this is who we are, and that is made in a divine image, and it carries a universal God identity. And so one of the things I love, in yoga, namaste.
Sure.
It's actually, I don't know if you know about this word, but I was reading yesterday, such a powerful, powerful phrase, because namaste is essentially an invitation for us to see the divine essence of the individual we're looking at.
Yes.
Come on, Doug.
Isn't that beautiful? And this goes back again, we talked about archaic Adam several podcasts ago. What differentiates me and you from the rest of the biological kingdom on the planet is that the story tells us that we are God-breathed, and that word for breath is ruach, and ruach is also the same word for the wind or spirit in the Hebrew. This is why Jesus says, where does the wind start or stop? Where do you find the beginning of spirit and the end of spirit? What's formless? You can't confine that. Our essence is that which cannot be confined to a form, just as God could not be confined to a form, like the form of a temple, coming full circle.
Gosh.
Building made with hands. We're talking about that universal nature of nature.
What's so fascinating to me is when you bring it home in 2018.
Yeah.
It's like Stephen, right? Stoned.
Yes.
And he makes comments like, well, the divine will not dwell in a temple made by men.
Right.
Doug, it's 2018. And in some ways, we never embraced the transformation of the temple.
Correct.
Because in our culture, at least, we get up on a Sunday morning.
Yep.
and I pastor a church, and people drive there.
Yes.
Now, I attend a collective for a whole nother reason.
Yes.
Than probably
obviously.
why lots and lots of other people do.
Yep.
But lots of people still embrace this mindset that I'm going to this temple because this is a sacred, holy place, and this is where the divine dwells, and I'm going to hear a word from the divine.
Yes.
And you go and you show up, and now in 2018, millions and millions and millions of dollars are used to build temples made by men, and yet all the while, the text is, God will not dwell in a temple made by men, and yet we keep building temples made by men and demanding and in some ways showing the world that, okay, well, I know the text says this, but there's still something sacred and holy about this temple.
Exactly. Which is the propensity of the egoic self to attach to a form, because without form, the ego cannot exist as an identity. And so there's always been and always will be this instinctive desire within me to attach to form rather than to detach. And that's, again, why we're going through this. And, in fact, we will be having some podcasts later as we go into the winter that will be as a result of a trip you and I are going to make to Toronto for the Parliament of World Religions.
Parliament of World Religions.
That sounds pretty official.
My God.
The Parliament of World Religions. And what is that? That's the Parliament of World Forms. And so I'm contributing an article to a Convergence magazine that is celebrating the International Day of Peace by all world religions. And I'm going to talk about transform, which is going to be real exciting for everybody that's at the Parliament. When, Cody, you might want to, you'll be like, I need to leave the room right now, because all these religion people are staring at Doug King and they're saying, wait a minute, you're saying there's something beyond religion. Well, that's why we're studying this. I mean, the impact of what we're saying and what we're going to continue to say is literally world-changing.
Yeah. Speaking of the Parliament of World Religions, that sounds like end times to me.
Depending on what denomination.
Oh, yes.
Because your denomination.
In my left behind
Yes.
denomination, I'll tell you right now, there was a one world government.
World
United
government.
Nations were totally involved in all of this as well.
Oh, how ugly.
And,
the thought that we could all be united as nations, that's horrible. This one God idea, how outrageous.
man, Doug.
Yeah. And that's why we're talking about this. Everything that we've got on the planet today is a form issue, meaning boundary-driven thinking. And I know we've said this before, but you can never say it too many times, I don't think. As we move into a new paradigm, you have to keep reemphasizing that there's an us versus them paradigm behind all of the problems that we're experiencing today, because they're human being problems.
Yeah.
And it's not that we don't have to make healthy decisions and functional versus dysfunctional decisions. It's that the starting place is always going to be the way I look at you when you and I sit down to engage in this conversation for a new earth.
Yeah. So last week talking about the specific date, 70 AD. Again, eschatology for us being starting at the cross, moving to 70 AD. This is the transform. This is the temple. And the reason we got to temple is because we were talking about Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants. And we talked about in the 4 quadrants, there's individual and collective, there's internal and external.
Yes.
And so we started this whole podcast with Jesus, the individual.
Right.
And we talked about the external and internal of that. And then we moved to the collective, which is the body of Christ.
Yes.
And the last couple podcasts, we've talked about several things, which probably rattled a few folks. I want to move forward with that evolution. So if you think about the collective and how it's evolved over time from animal sacrifices from the temple
Yeah.
to even Eucharist, baptism, things like that.
Yes.
Which, again, has a role and function.
Yeah.
But as like animal sacrifices, we're evolving and growing. And as we evolve and grow, we need to ask bigger questions. Okay, well, what's next for us?
Yes.
And what does this look like as people of God now that the entire boundaries and walls around us have exploded? Well, what does that look like for us? And so we've been talking about these external forms of the collective. Anything that you want to add to the temple? Because I know we want to jump into some other external forms of the collective that have died and have been rebirthed.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of elements there that I want to reinforce. Again, a lot of reinforcement here. And that is that the temple itself, of course, was a form. It was an external form, so it belongs in the quadrants in the lower right-hand side. And that external form had four walls that also were called the Holy of Holies, and that's where the presence of God was. And so that indicated that the people who could not go in there were seeing themselves as separate from God, separation. And that separation is the biblical narrative's definition of death. And that separation is also an indication of the way that they attach to form. And so even in their thinking about how they were trying to please this God who was other, the concept of sin came into language. And the way sin it can exist, and the only way sin can exist, the only way death can exist, is through attachment to form. It cannot exist in the formless, and this is why it ends up being the last enemy that is defeated. And so this sin, the word sin, is based upon whether or not a person violated the boundary of a commandment. So if the commandment says, keep the Sabbath day holy, all the Pharisees, or those who are most concerned about boundary keeping, because this is the way we identify with God, to be pleasing, all of those Pharisees are watching Jesus every minute, and they're asking him questions like, is it lawful? Because what they want to know is, have you remained within the boundaries of the form? And this form is within consciousness. All of us have forms within our consciousness. And so for them, the temple was an outward symbol of what was going on inside their consciousness. And so you've got sin, and you got violation of a boundary. And so what will this require at the temple? It will require the most important feast day that the Israelites will participate in, and that is the atonement. And what is atonement about? Atonement is about sin and death. You go to that temple. Everyone comes to the temple, no matter where you live. You make the pilgrimage. You go for the atonement. And what is it that happens in the atonement? Well, there's a sacrifice of bulls and goats that is external to the human being. What does a bull or a goat have to do with their essence? Nothing. And so what they're experiencing is a world of form. And by the way, these were all necessary experiences. This is all teaching us in the story. It's explaining to us in the story the way form works. And so the blood of bulls and goats kept them locked in a cycle. Bondage is when you're in a cycle or a loop and you can't get out. If you're an addict, you're in a loop and you can't get out. If you're in an abusive marriage, especially one that involves domestic abuse, you will find that both people are in a loop. And the loop builds up and builds up and builds up until the abuser breaks out and does something physically bad to the other person. And then that pressure is released. And then you would expect the other person to leave and immediately get out, and you'll find that the other person, typically the wife, will say, no, I don't want to press charges. And you're sitting there watching this maybe as a show on TV or something and going, what in the world are you thinking? Well, what they're thinking is a consciousness of, I cannot bear the thought of not having this other person. Maybe it'll be different next time. Well, all of these are loops that are getting, and sin and death is a way of understanding form and identity. We will see that the transform of Jesus, which is a priestly work, and his death to form is a new paradigm or way of saying, no, wait a minute, we are one with God. Boundaries are not for the purpose of determining our oneness with God. Boundaries are simply still there. Yes, absolutely. But why do we use boundaries and form? To see if, in fact, the things that I do today, in my understanding, are aligned with Spirit and the identity I am and always will be, or whether or not I have disconnected or am resisting the Spirit that I am.
Okay. Question.
Yeah.
Because you just tore it up. Okay. You made a statement that I want to repeat. Because if I'm listening to this podcast while I'm running, I'm going to take a photo of this time on the podcast. That's how I remember certain moments. And the one that I would have snapped is you just said, boundaries are not for the purpose to determine our oneness with God.
Correct.
Man, first of all, that is a great line. Boundaries are not for the purpose to determine our oneness with God. We use boundaries and form to see and determine if we are aligned with the Spirit. Okay. If boundaries are not for the purpose to determine our oneness with God or our identity, then the natural question that arises for lots of people is, particularly in this conversation of dying to form, being transformed to formlessness. Okay, so are you telling me I can do whatever I want and it doesn't change my God identity?
Yeah, it's kind of like saying, hey, guess what? We live in a free country, and X hundred years ago, 250 years ago, whatever, we established a space called freedom. We are free, and we are free in a democracy. And you, Cody, have free choice in this democracy. And so you look at me and you say, you mean I could go out and rob a bank? You mean I could kill somebody? This is awesome. Well, you can do all those things, but that doesn't mean there won't be consequences. You'll still be a citizen of the country, but you will have some consequence that comes with that, and you will not know the peace that passes understanding. And I think this is the big point that the narrative is trying to get me to, and that is how to find peace in my life. Because I don't care who you are, you're actually, even when you're on drugs, you're medicating, you're trying to find peace, you're being tortured. And what you're being tortured by is something you've attached to.
That's great.
That is a false form.
Yes.
Creating a false self. And so I had boundaries when we raised the 4 kids. Boundaries, though, weren't so that at the end of the day, I could say, sorry, you're no longer part of our family. Your last name used to be King, but you blew it, and so you don't any longer have that identity because you violated boundaries. No parent in their right mind is going to say that. Everyone's going to go, well, duh. But see, this is what I think the narrative is telling us. We're a reflection of God. The way I do family is the way God does family. So no difference there.
I love that.
And so, so basically, again, though, it's coming back to this idea of to please that God that's in the Holy of Holies, I do these things.
Yes.
And form, then, is always going to be related to doing, and this feeling that I have to do something to be accepted. And I'm going to cheat just for a minute here. I'm going to do a little cheating. I want to do a series in the near future on the Enneagram numbers, all 9 of them, for those of you out there who are Enneagram freaks, and we know that there are a lot of you. I want to do a series that really discusses what each number tries to do in their unhealthy state simply to be accepted. What did I do growing up in my family as this number, simply so that I would be accepted at school, accepted here and there. And now we will get into acceptance. And that's why it's so powerful, Cody, when we realize that form, when I go through form, I am always trying to measure up. But when I realize that I'm formless, I'm going to enter into a realm called the immeasurable. And I'm going to realize that there aren't any boundaries between me and that which I understand to be spirit.
And that's good news.
Oh, that's great news.
The peace that comes with that.
Yes.
And to me, that to bring it back full circle, that's the atonement. This is what was transpiring in the temple. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement.
Yes.
You never knew where you stood with the divines.
Yes.
And there was this deep sense of anxiety, and you were constantly trying to please.
Yes.
None of that ever really changed. I think about the world I grew up in. We went to a temple Sunday morning, Sunday night.
Yes.
Monday night, we usually had some kind of a special event. Tuesday night, we had what they called, wait for it,
Nice.
soul winning and visitation.
I like that.
And then Wednesday night, we had some kind of a thing. And then it was constantly, have you read the scriptures? Did you have a quiet time this morning? Did you read the Bible?
Yeah.
How many people have you led to faith in Christ? There's like a list of all these things.
Yes.
Because somewhere deep inside, there's this meritocracy.
Yeah.
This quid pro quo that I'm doing all of this because somewhere the divine's keeping score on whether or not I am accepted or not accepted.
Yes.
And we're saying the good news of the gospel. Hang with me. It's like getting preachery up in here. The good news of the gospel.
I like
is,
it.
my friends, all of you,
Yeah.
at your core, at your essence, I've got good news. Yeah, you've been accepted. And that anxiety and that striving and that grasping and that kicking and I've got to do these things to make sure you are one with the divine right now, just as you are.
Yes.
God, that's good news.
It's awesome news. And all of the pain and suffering that people are experiencing or causing others to experience is coming from an unconsciousness that they are already one with all that is. And so this is not a matter of them getting their act together so that they can become one. This is a matter of understanding that they are one so that they can quit acting out in ways that hurt themselves and others. So we're switching the paradigm.
Wait a minute. Were we even talking about eschatology somehow?
Well, that's what's funny. This is actually at the heart of eschatology, which brings us back to the start of this conversation today, and I guess where we'll really have to leave it for right now.
Absolutely. So that was Eschatology Part 5. My friends, the temple is gone. And the temple is gone, and that's good news, because how could that temple in those four walls ever be big enough for this divine that's formless?
There you go. So we'll leave it with that. We thank you for joining us for this one, and we also appreciate all the emails that you've been sending. And we do try to get to those questions and incorporate that into the podcast as well. But for right now, we'll say goodbye. And Cody, we'll see everybody next time.
Have a good week.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.